Serious, defense attorneys of Reddit, what is the worst offense you've ever had to defend? Not worst in so much as it was serious, but worst as in, geez, do I really have to do this? One time I was trying to defend a guy that was alleged to have thrown his own piss in a woman's face. The kicker? The guy was an inmate and the woman was a guard at the prison. So it really takes things up a notch penalty wise. Our defense. Her face tested positive for urea, a substance that is in human piss, but is also in an enormous variety of female beauty products. We had to basically argue that she put the piss on her own face through one of these products and they couldn't prove the defendant didn't just throw water on her. I mean, I feel bad for the guard. I wouldn't want someone to throw piss in my face equals. Posted elsewhere. But I defended a guy who sent poop through the mail to his ex-GF from state prison. I don't know how it got past prison officials, but it did. And he didn't deny sending it. However, we went to trial because he wanted me to argue that the poop was expressive speech, and thus protected by the First Amendment. We lost. TLDR, sheet case. We lost. Worst had to be the gentleman who spent years raping his stepdaughter. He videotaped it, so we had to watch at trial. We knew the reason he insisted on going to trial because he wanted to see video again. That's just horrific. I can't imagine how difficult that must be to watch. Criminal defense attorney here. I hate doing child porn cases. Not only is the crime reprehensible, but then I have to go and review the discovery myself, which I absolutely hate. Thankfully haven't had one of those cases in a while. I also hate civil asset forfeiture, but for entirely different reasons. When I get a drug case where the client's assets are seized, not only do I have to deal with the criminal charges, but I'll also handle the civil asset forfeiture because that's what my firm does. I hate civil law, but it's quasi-criminal so I can deal with it. But the whole asset forfeiture scheme is bullshit. In my jurisdiction, if over $25,000 is seized, no criminal conviction is necessary for the DA to keep the money, which is entirely backwards. We will still have a civil trial, but it's by a lesser standard than a criminal trial, beyond a reasonable doubt vs. clear and convincing evidence. There was a movement to reform the asset forfeiture laws, but the DA's association opposed it and effectively held the reform. Their reasoning being that DA offices and police departments allocate and rely on asset forfeiture for a part of their budgets, which is essentially admitting that they have a cash incentive to rob people. The summer after my first year in law school I worked in the public defender's office. Numerous attorneys had to defend clients who had allegedly sexually assaulted infants and toddlers. I guess in order to cope with doing that a lot of them made jokes out of it. I would hear somebody talking about a case and an attorney would say something like, yeah, but did you see how that baby was dressed? She was asking for it. I never knew how to feel about that. Horrible and distasteful. But they have to stand in court and represent those people. They can't get out of the case. I don't know, man. Public defender here. I once represented an 11-year-old charged with forcible sodomy against another 11-year-old. You will often see kids charged with molesting other kids, but it's rare to get a juvenile defendant that young. Sometimes the parents are overreacting to two kids playing doctor. Sometimes it's evidence that the kids themselves have been abused by an adult. Juvenile cases get complicated. Juvenile sex cases get absurdly complicated. Between draconian laws that aren't really designed for juveniles. Competency issues. How do you get a knowing, intelligent, and voluntary plea from a child? And moronic parents. It can get pretty overwhelming. No details. Because of confidentiality, I had to work on a file doing research. The specific issues were whether it is possible to have accidental anal penetration, i.e. whether wrong hole is ever a real thing. And if so, if it could result in a rectovaginal fistula, tearing the ears and vag together to make one big unhappy hole. Short answers. Apparently yes. Risk factors include sexual inexperience, inebriation, and the dark. Apparently yes. Apparently there are very rare cases of consensual vaginal intercourse doing the same thing. So. UHH. I hope that image doesn't hit you at an inopportune moment. Public defender here. Matter of public record. Still owe a duty of confidentiality. All that jazz. A client of our office was convicted of assault, defined as a non-consensual physical contact, with sexual motivation. The alleged victim being the 6-year-old niece of the defendant, making it also a crime of domestic violence. It's by far the darkest case I've been assigned. I can say, without reservation, that he got a fair shake. Although the offense itself wasn't particularly repugnant. I once had to defend someone who had been charged for driving with a suspended license because he was, quite honestly, in his and my opinion, on his way to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting to prevent himself from drinking. He was a very serious alcoholic who had been convicted of impaired driving several times. And he had found that the only way he could stay sober was by attending AA meetings regularly. On this particular day, his license was suspended because of a prior conviction. He lived quite a distance outside of town. And his friend who typically drove him into town cancelled at the last minute. In a panic. Worried that without attending the meeting he would relapse. And inevitably end up hurting someone else, quite possibly by driving impaired again. He drove his own vehicle, stone cold sober, into town. On the way, he was stopped by the police and charged with driving with a suspended license. In court, I wasn't sure whether to tell the judge that despite the delay on the roadside and the laying of a very serious additional criminal charge to this poor guy's history, he managed to call his AA sponsor who picked him up on the side of the highway and drove him to the meeting just in time to arrive only a few minutes late. And stay sober for an additional 24 hours. Albeit with a reduced likelihood of the same positive outcome on the sobriety front the following day. So in my state, if you are in a relationship with someone or had been and you commit certain crimes, they get tagged as domestic violence. This tag gives additional penalties. Long story short, my client received a BJ from a girl and then hit her. We went to trial because the state wanted to say that one BJ was a relationship and my guy didn't want to do the domestic violence classes. So we took it to the jury who ruled that one BJ isn't a relationship. I always have wondered how many BJs is a relationship. Without getting into too many details that would breach confidentiality, I defended a guy charged with one of those Craigslist reverse Chris Hansen type stings. Stopped doing that type of defense after that case and went back to DUI, DWLS, and traffic tickets. I defended a guy in preliminary hearing who was accused of raping his daughter. It was awful because she was very graphic. I did my best to limit the scope of her answers for the sake of my own sanity. Oh. I also had a guy stand out of a sunroof and point an AR-15 at an undercover cop. Guy was on probation when this happened. Co-worker represented a guy that beat and burned a kitten and recorded it. She had to watch the video and she came to my office crying after. Duck that guy. Worst I had was when my client was charged with impersonating a police officer. It was the worst because it was so ridiculous. He was 70 years old and was going to the Social Security office. When he went through the metal detector, he had a police shield that he put in the tray with his keys and phone. He collected police memorabilia and liked to carry it around. The guard at the metal detector arrested him. Defended an old guy driver who hit and killed a mentally challenged girl who had run across 6 lanes of traffic against the signal. The guy did nothing wrong. The worst part about the situation was that we were being paid by the dead girl's family's insurance company, who the family was suing for benefits. That's just a lose-lose situation. I feel bad for the parents of the girl. And I get they're wanting to sue. But I have to ask, did they even have a chance at winning their case? I'm not a defense attorney, but I worked a brief stint at the public defender's office during law school. While I worked there, I took care of a lot of bail hearings and other simpler things. If you spend any time working for the PD, you will quickly learn the names of the repeat offenders who come in on a monthly, if not weekly, basis. One such fellow, let's call him Stan, liked to do Drew Gus. I was informed by the DA's office that he had a warrant out for a probation violation. So I gave Stan a call and told him to turn himself in. Now, as I said, Stan was a regular and knew all of the drills. If you turn yourself in, or get picked up, after a certain time, you wear your street clothes in front of the judge instead of the sexy little jumpsuit. As it turns out, he turned himself in with a crack pipe in his pocket. This can't get any worse. Right? Wrong. I'm thinking that Stan has to be the dumbest man to face that courtroom when I look up and see him being escorted into the courtroom by the bailiff wearing a shirt that says, "High as duck." Let's just say his bail hearing was about as successful as the rest of his life choices. The 90-year-old woman who routinely smuggled Drew Gus in her vag into prisons was more interesting than most. The gang murder has a pretty routine at this point. As a young lady, it's the ones who aren't killing in the name of territory, street cred, etc. that get to me. I was really affected by a particularly brutal, cold, calculated, sick 30-something man accused of murder. He was eerily calm and cocky about his encounter with an underage girl he met and chatted up for about 20 minutes that resulted ultimately in her drowning with suspicious surrounding circumstances. He was obviously disturbed and it was very unsettling just being near him. Images of him smiling for the news cameras in the courtroom will weirdly pop into my head on a somewhat random basis and it still gives me the heebie-jeebies. The act he put on when he insisted upon being put on the stand in trial ruined him. He would have walked but for his ridiculous testimony. Within seconds the jury, who had been paying close attention previously, looked horrified as he told these stories and stopped taking notes. Their minds were made up as soon as he opened his creepy mouth. He was quickly convicted. We did a really stellar job in his case. But he dug his own grave. Justice was served. I have previously told this story here, Reddit.com. I had a brilliant gentleman on probation for narcotics trafficking and was not permitted to use a cell phone. He went in for a drug test with his probation officer, and his cell rang in his pocket. The PO went to take the phone from his pocket and also pulled out a large baggie of coke that he brought to his drug test.